So it's a thrill to see all of you here. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Catherine Colbert. They call me Kitty, and I run the Athena Center for Leadership Studies at Barnard. And the good news is I see at least 2 of our former students who've come back for the night, which we always love to see. And a number of others of you who are participating in Athena programs. For those of you who don't know, Athena runs the number of programs for students, including the Athena Scholars Program, the Digital Design Agency, which builds websites and teaches coding to Barnard students. We run amazing executive education programs for adult women and programs around entrepreneurship to help women become better leaders of their startups. And my favorite program of all, probably our signature program, the Athena Film Festival. So if you have your calendar, please pull out the dates, February 28th through March 3rd of next year, to come to campus and see extraordinary films that highlight women in leadership in all aspects of life and from across the globe. Usually around 45 films, features, documentaries, shorts, panels, workshops, parties, you name it. It's a great 4 days to come back to campus to have a really different view of what leadership looks like. Tonight, we are doing the last of our Power Talks of the year, and I am thrilled to introduce to you Linda Bell, who is the college provost and who is going to be introducing our guest and leading tonight's session. Let me just say one more thing about Power Talks. You've all been signed up now that you've told us who you are. We have signed you up to get invitations to future Power Talks. We do somewhere between 4 to 5 distinguished women who are visiting fellows with us for the course of a 2-year period. You get to hear women from all just amazing backgrounds who've had incredible accomplishments. So I encourage you not only to stay tonight, ask great questions, but to come back in the future. So thank you very much, and here you go, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am really thrilled to be here with Carol Evans. Carol, I would, having been introduced many times, and knowing the injustice that is done in reading CVs, my first question to you would be, many in the room have read about you. We know about various undertakings about the brilliance of your career. Could you take us back to introduce yourself, if you will? Tell us not just about your varied and numerous accomplishments, but tell us a little bit about the Carol Evans that isn't on the bio and isn't on the web search, and sort of defines who you've been and what you've become.
Oh, sure. Well, if you really want to know a lot about me, like more than you really necessary to know, you can always read my book. It's called This is How We Do It, The Working Mother's Manifesto. And I wrote it in 2006. Literally, it is very much the story of my career and my family, juxtaposed with stories about the business and how businesses can help women and help working mothers. But it was kind of funny because when I wrote the book, I put in all these stories. I opened each chapter with stories about my personal life. And then I would be on the train with someone and I'd say, oh, my daughter Julia, this or that. And they'd say, oh yeah, I know, I read the book. And then I'd be talking to someone in business and I'd say, well, my husband Bob, and they go, yeah, I know Bob, I read the book. And it got to the point where I was like, okay, wait a minute, this is no fun anymore. I don't have any stories to tell. But that's when you share yourself very openly like I do when I'm speaking and when I'm working and when I'm writing, there isn't a lot that's not known. But I started my career in a totally unexpected way. I was trying to be an editor. I have a liberal arts degree in English, and I was desperate to be an editor of a magazine. The more intellectually minded the magazine, the better it would be, And so I went out with my great degree, and I wanted to, to get this great job. And I was living in Chicago, and just missing a little bit of the practical side. in that I couldn't get a job as a magazine editor in Chicago because there weren't any except Playboy magazine, which was based there.
Which didn't fit the criteria that you were talking about.
It didn't fit the criteria at all. So all these offices, every magazine had an office, but they were all sales offices working with the companies in Chicago. And so, I was knocking on all these doors, and they said to me, we're a sales office. And so I said, well, I can sell. I sold the most Campfire Girl candy every year of my life, since I was 7. And they were pretty impressed with that. And I got my first job in sales. And so my career changed dramatically, and probably much for the better. Things happen along the way that are milestones. And the first milestone that happened to me was that I was working for what was a very large publishing company, McCall's, and I had landed a job there. I was the 3rd woman to sell ad space in the city of Chicago. And there were, hundreds and hundreds of men doing this job. But it was new to women. So McCall's launched Working Mother magazine with a one-shot, which was a newsstand, one-time magazine. And I just knew right then and there that I would be able to do something really good with this magazine because my mother was a working mother, and I knew all about how I had helped her. I'd helped her pick out her clothes. I'd helped her grade her papers. I'd done all this stuff as a teenager because I just, loved to do things. And so I sold the most pages into that magazine, that launch, and they moved me to New York right away, and my career in management started because I was successful at selling. And so then I became a manager of a national magazine. We launched it nationally because I had sold so many pages that they couldn't do anything else. And I became a manager at the age of 28 and got a very early start in that side of the business and stayed with Working Mother 10 years, grew it. It became a very significant publication. And of course, as it was reaching its apex, I decided to leave. So I left because I wanted to become an entrepreneur, and I didn't want to be a corporate person the rest of my life, so I went to work for an entrepreneur. And I worked for 2 entrepreneurs in a row. The first one sold the company that I ran for him. The next one, I worked for him for 6 years, and then Working Mother came up for sale. And I got very excited about that, 2001. And I had learned enough about being an entrepreneur to know that you don't go to a bank and ask for a loan to buy a company, which I had actually tried to do when Working Mother came up for sale when I was, much, much younger. And so I found some really great guys who wanted to invest. They were all guys, but they were all young dads. And we bought Working Mother. And that was the next 16 years of my life, was not as much, definitely growing it, but just changing it radically and making it into what I wanted it to be, and also responding to the terrible market forces that were at play, because I literally bought the magazine 3 weeks before 9/11, and we lost 29% of our business as soon as 9/11 happened, just gone, vaporized. And then, I had to recover the company, brand new company. Didn't know the people's names, but I knew that on that day I had to save their lives. Make sure they didn't do anything foolish. Like one of my employees wanted to walk home. She lived in the Bronx, and I told her she couldn't walk home from 57th Street. So, so it was trial by fire, but wonderful. And that's my career has been all about Working Mother since then.
That's really fascinating. Thank you. Yeah. So if we could talk a little bit about Working Mother magazine. Mm-hmm. You built the magazine into something truly unique. You created all kinds of special initiatives, including the 100 best companies for women, the 100 best companies for multicultural women, a bunch of other really cool initiatives. So as you look back on your 2 stints at Working Mother, your earlier stint and then coming back really as someone who could influence and change things, what about the process what 1 or 2 things about the process really stand out or as having surprised you the most or challenged you the most? If you could just name one or two.
Always the biggest challenge, whether it was in the first 10 years or in the last 15 years, always the biggest challenge was to make the money come out right. You know, I mean, it's creating a profitable venture is really a lot of work, and keeping it profitable through the ups and downs of not just something like 9/11, as dramatic as that, but also recessions. And I've been through 4 recessions and had to keep the companies I was running on the straight and narrow through those recessions. As you lost, you know, in 2008, we lost another 30% of our business. I was like, what is this? Every 7 years, I lose 30% of my business. You know, what kind of a challenge is this for me? So, you know, it was just, you are surprised, always surprised at how hard it is to maintain the financial security of your business. And I'm also been kind of surprised at how important it is. You know, I mean, I think that we tend to think of the great works that I did at Working Mother, Best Companies for Multicultural Women, was so early. It was a very early entry into the field of diversity and into really putting companies' feet to the fire on how women of color were being treated so much worse than white women, who were being treated so much worse than men, and so on. You know, and Best Law Firms for Women, which really made law firms look at their partnership track. It's an abysmal partnership track, still is today. And, you know, on and on, all these initiatives. So it feels like it's all about the work that you're doing, that you're accomplishing for the bigger picture of what you have in mind. But really, the surprising thing is that you want to keep those 150 people employed, because their families are counting on you, you know, and counting on the business. And you want to make sure that you're delivering something that's meaningful to your clients. Mm-hmm. You know, so while we, as businesswomen, we have the privilege of being able to shape an organization in our image of what we think needs to be accomplished in the world, it all funnels down to that ability to make a sale, to make a customer happy, to keep a sales team excited and growing and learning, and to to envision what will work, what will sell, what will work in the future. So you stake your claim on it now, and then give it up the minute you realize that it wasn't the right bet to make. You know, these are the surprises. These are the things that make a businesswoman, or a businessman, but make you test your mettle and make you really, really, really good at what you do.
So what happens when you face a 30% shock? And you're faced with issues of employees and loyalties and all the kinds of things that you described and that your magazine, The Enterprise, was known for. How do you deal with that? How did you deal with that in 2008?
Well, first of all, you have to be very brave. There's a thing that I think of as corporate bravery. And corporate bravery is, is very similar to going into war and being brave in war or being brave in politics, It's bravery in a corporate setting. And you have to have that because, business will just chop you off at the knees over and over again. And if you're not brave, then you won't have the resilience to come back and find out a new path. It's all about finding that new path. So after 9/11, we lost 30% of our business, literally like that. Advertisers stopped advertising. We had a conference that was $1 million conference that was supposed to be held on September 25th. The mayor shut down all the airports. Nobody could fly in. So what we did was we said, okay, how can we save this? We can't save the advertising. It's gone. We have to get that back next year. How can we save the $1 million conference? And we strategized and worked together, this team. I didn't know the people's names on my team. Who are you anyway? And what are you doing? But I had to work really fast to find out who knew what they were actually doing in my brand new company, and how we could save that $1 million piece of business, which we did. We got the mayor to allow us a date of October 11th. We were the first conference to be held after 9/11. We took the program, we ripped it up. We had all of our speakers had been lined up for months. We sat down. I sat down with Erica Gruen, really smart lady, at probably a typewriter. I don't think it was even a computer. Maybe it was a computer. I can't remember. We sat down and we rewrote the program together, just two brains, and we created a program called something like, how to make your employees feel safe in the age of terrorism, because it was basically an HR conference. And so that $1 million conference, we saved that money. And we did it through being very flexible, very quick, very using all of our intelligence. The thing about being a CEO is you use every ounce of your energy and intelligence and your full knowledge base and your ability to learn all the time. That's what makes it so exciting. So that's what we did. And then the advertising was much slower. It took us years to get that 30% back. But the entire industry was in the same boat. So we all, many of us survived, some didn't. And I immediately set to work at diversifying our revenue stream. So we had to go from an advertising-centric company, and so I totally went in other directions and built out conferences, research, things that I would have done, but maybe not have done as quickly as I did. And we became a very multifaceted platform for the issues of women that women faced in the workforce. And I was able to shift the company from being an advertising-based company to being a mission-based company that brought in advertising and brought in revenue and was profitable.
Very interesting. I'm an economist, as you may know, so I'm curious about the metrics behind how you judge these companies, because your lists are infamous and have been, as you mentioned, and I will affirm, very important in terms of the best companies for women, best law firms, multicultural, et cetera. So what are your metrics? How do you come up with those lists, and what kind of research do you do and how often how dynamic are they?
Yeah.
How often do they shift and change?
That's a great question, because people, don't know, but they're very rigorous, and they're really, cooperation from the companies themselves. So companies give us their data. We send them, it's all online, of course, we send them a very deep application. They have to apply. And the application, at its peak, it had 700 questions. So 700 questions that a company would have to fill out. We've subsequently cut back on the number of questions to the point where I think we're at about 400 now. So, and the questions come in clusters. So you have questions about childcare, about maternity and paternity leave, questions about flexible work arrangements, and then questions about culture, company culture. And there's one point person at each company, and they fan out the questions online to the departments that know the answers, but it'll be very specific. What percentage of your women took maternity leave? How long did they take? What are your maternity leave policies? What are your paternity leave policies? What percentage of your men took paternity leave? How many weeks did they take? And on and on and on. And all the questions fan out into many other branches of the same questions. And so it's a big HR, and the CFO has to get involved, CIO, everybody. And these companies deliver the answers back to us. They have 3 months to fill it out, and then we rank them by computer, and there's, it's a strict numerical ranking. They give us an essay about themselves, but we use that for editorial, not for the rankings. And so the top companies are, can be, they cluster, like you might have company number 9 and 10 and 11 are just really close, but there's just maybe a couple of points separating them. So each time you have an answer that is favorable, you get a point. And so there's, all these points that you earn. And it's a real, it's a very rigorous thing. It evolved, and I launched Working Mothers Best Companies with 30 companies in 1986. And it was just, calling up companies and saying, what are you doing for working mothers? And gathering a bunch of information and declaring a list. And then it got very sophisticated over the years. So I'm very proud of the rigor of it. And for women of color, it'd be like 200 questions, because there wasn't as much emphasis on programs and policies, it was all about representation, you know, and then programs and policies, but we wanted to know how many women of color by race were in each level of position, and, you know, we judged you on how well you were integrating all levels of your business with various races of women.
So just to shift gears a little bit, you talked about how one of the sort of accomplishments of your return to working mother was the ability to move it in mission-driven ways. And so a lot of your work obviously has been mission-driven, and you know, we're seeing as a country, as a society, as a world, progress for women. It's slow in certain areas. There are certain trends that are positive. We've seen companies institute new workplace policies that are advantageous to women, or more flexible arrangements, or parental leave and other kinds of things. But yet, you know, Equal Pay Day just brings to light how, you know, the limitations of some of that progress. So I'd like to just, and you know, we know the stats, 80%, women earn on average 80% of what men earn. Takes women a year and a half to earn what a comparable man would earn. Latina women earn 54 cents to the dollar. African American women 62 cents to the dollar. They're all really startling and stagnating statistics. There's been improvement over time, but one could argue not enough. So I'd like you to muse a little bit on where there's been progress, how we come to grips with those trends as people who care passionately about these issues, and maybe offer some analysis, insight into how to push the needle just a little bit further.
Sure. Well, let's just start with wage gap. First of all, I think that every woman should be extremely, maybe excessively angry about this. And we, you know, I just watched that wonderful movie Network. It was on TV the other night, and I said, "Oh, Bob, let's watch this. I haven't seen this in years." And then I realized I actually had never watched it. You know, when I was watching it, I was like, "I thought I saw this, but I only saw that one scene. I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore." If you haven't seen it, it's really a great period piece and a great stir up your anger piece. And you know, really, we need to be angry. I mean, we should be a lot angrier than we are. We're not anywhere near angry enough as women. Because it's just insane. I mean, you know, we made a lot more progress in the 80s. I think we improved the wage gap by about 4.5%. Then in the 90s, by about 4%. And then this decade, the decade 2007 to 2017, we've only improved the wage gap by 2%. And it's just practically nothing now these days in terms of improvement. And, you know, that's why we should be mad. No improvements have been made. And one thing that that college students really need to understand is that this is an issue that, you know, when you graduate and you get your first job, that's the best job of your life in terms of wage gap. You know, you're going to want to just say thank you to whoever hires you for giving you such a great equal wage, because it goes down and down and down after your first job. And a lot of young women don't realize as they go into their careers, they think, hey, everything's great. What are you talking about? I don't experience any discrimination. I don't experience any wage gap. I'm doing just as well as the guys over here, and I'll kick their asses, you know. And it's just not true, because over and over and over, every single decade we've seen that as women age, the wage gap gets worse. And it's a multiplier, because when you have a wage gap, you also have a pension gap. You have an inability to afford living in the home that you want, in the neighborhood that you want, paying off your student loans, you pay them off slower. There's all kinds of things that happen to you over the course of your life. But, so just look at this one statistic. When you are in your 25 to 35 year range, 25 to 34-year-olds, there's only a 91% wage gap. By the time you're in the 45 to 55-year-old, you're at a 74% wage gap. So that 80 is a medium, a mid mark. So you're starting out at 91%, the same as men, and then you're getting worse. And so when you are, let's say you are 25 years old, the average in 2017, the average gap in wage was $5,000, like $44,000 to $49,000. But a woman who is 60 in 2017 has a $78,000 wage gap. That's 60%. She's making 60%, a woman who's 60 years old. So that's the reality that you're facing in the future. So even if you feel like we're making progress, we're not. And things get much worse as you get older. And it's because the multiplier effect, you're losing $5,000 today, and then as you go up in your income, you're losing more. Women CEOs make very significantly much less than male CEOs, and have all along. In fact, I remember a great story. Jill Barad was fired from Mattel, and I was interviewed on CNN for it, or one of those stations, and I said, I am so proud of her. Finally, a woman got $65 million in her package being fired. Said, finally, a woman got as much as a man for failing. And it was true. It was the first time a woman had ever received an enormous package for failure. And I told everyone, that's a huge success. So, but anyway, I think the wage gap issue is just the tip of the iceberg because, we're all proud that there's 32 women CEOs in the Fortune 500, in 2017. But if you do the math, it's 468 guys to 32. Is that right? Did I do the math right?
Well, and if you look at all public companies across the U.S.,
Yeah.
Some of my research touches on this. So you look at all public companies, 80% of the market cap of the whole U.S. economy, essentially. It's 3% of those public companies have women CEOs, 3%. It rose up to about 5% in the late 80s, and now it's back down again to 3%.
Yeah, and that's about power sharing. One of the things that we know is that men are so predominantly in the positions of power in this country, and we disguise it a lot. People don't realize it a lot. My favorite story about a company that everybody loves and knows, and I won't name, but they decided to put their org chart out in a flat way, and they named the top 17 people, and nobody had realized they were all men, because when the org chart was put like this, it looked like there were a lot of women in charge, but there weren't any women in charge, none, and it created an enormous firestorm in the company as people realized that there was no powerful women in the company. And I do think that when we can talk about wage, but it's really about power, And one of my favorite CEOs is Sandy Peterson over at Johnson & Johnson, and she has said publicly, I'm just going to hire women for all the top jobs. It's the only way that we're going to make any progress,
That's great. So this is the question that I've been dreaming about asking you, because I sit behind a desk. Most of the time I solve problems. I do a lot of research analysis. And so the punchline of my latest research is that in companies that are run by women, there's a greater representation of women in high-level positions. So, as you know, reported wages are only for the top 5 to 10 employees in the company, so we have a higher percentage of those women. We also see that in those companies that are run by women, so there are companies in which there's a woman CEO who's also on her board, either as chair or a member of her board, we see that there's no wage gap. So in the executive data, as you mentioned, even in top companies in the US, women earn less than men. Women top executives earn less than men, but not in women-led companies. So do you believe that? Because economists have a hard time accepting that. Do you believe that, judging from your own experience, from your own corporate experience, do you think women help women? Do you think they empower other women to succeed?
Oh, yeah, I do. I know there is an old adage, there's an old story, and it's an old story, the queen bee who only wants to be the only woman. That's an 80s story, I was there in the 80s. I knew the queen bees, That's not the story anymore. That's a very old story, and if men still believe it, then they're going to find out that it's not true when they encounter true power in women's hands, like you have with Sandy Peterson. But I think that, at our NAFI organization, which working with our own National Association for Female Executives, and our big mantra was women standing for each other. And we preached that to women, at very senior levels, and we still do. And it's a very important mantra for young women to learn, is women standing for each other. Because, the days of competing for the small pie, and that's what it was. There was a pie, but women were only allowed a teeny sliver of that pie. And so, we fought for that teeny sliver of that pie. Now we're fighting to make the pie bigger, and we're helping each other to make the pie bigger. And, and so we can all have our piece. But really, it's still a power struggle with men. Men tend to hire men, and men tend to, really we all tend to hire people who look a little bit like us. That's part of the problem. We believe in that person who looks a little bit like us, like they'll do it. I did it. They'll do it. And so that's a very unsophisticated part of the problem, but it's still a factor. And so I think that yes, women are standing for each other, and women are really stepping up to support women. And I do believe that women run businesses. It's more fun to hire women if you're a woman. That's my theory. I hired all women at Working Mother. We had a men's room with 3 stalls, and we had 3 men in the company, so we put their name on each stall. and that's how we felt about men. We had enough. We had 1 for each stall.
It was 1 man per stall policy.
That's it. That was all. If 1 man left, we'd hire another.
Okay, that's great.
Had to keep that 3.
Okay, thank you. So, can we talk a little bit about the Me Too movement?
Oh yeah, I love the Me Too movement.
So obviously, this is some long overdue attention to workplace sexual harassment and sexual violence. I guess I have a question for you. First, in your various roles and the way in which you, in your career and in your ascent in your career, have you either witnessed or experienced some form of harassment? And if so, how did you deal with it, either as a spectator or as a victim?
Well, as a victim, in the 80s, okay, it was really hard to not experience sexual harassment because, I was taking men out to dinner, and then I had to explain to them why I couldn't go back to their hotel room with them. And, basically you just had to say no a lot. It was very hard. And I was, I don't know, I certainly experienced it, but not to the degree that Gretchen Carlson and the women who have come forward in the Me Too movement to really launch the Me Too movement. I never felt it was that exact kind. I mean, in the 80s, you just thought of it as part of how you did your job. My boss would ask me to sleep with him every single business trip that we went on. And I would say, no, I really like your wife, Pam. I'm not going to sleep with you because I like Pam, And so we had our methods, and we'd fake drink our alcohol so that we wouldn't, accidentally say yes. I mean, it was just all these things that was just part of life in the 80s, and it was just a much more freewheeling time. And when I moved to New York, literally every man in McCall's offices was having an affair with someone in the office, and every woman was having an affair. And it was just a very different kind of thing. And we all got more professional about it, and we all, and it was, a lot of it was horrible, and a lot of it was really, career stopping, lots of career damage all the way around. But what's happened now is that, now we have rules and we have laws and we have, protection. And so the violators are really in a different situation than they were in the 80s. It's no longer the social norm. And so now we have power to fight against this, and we should use that power because we never want to go back to what that was. That was untenable, and it was just early days of women coming into executive positions. That's how I saw it. But now the Me Too movement has an incredibly serious and important role to play to equalize the playing field in business and in our careers.
So do you have advice for young women who are going to start their first job at 91 cents on average, by the way. But these women are not average. They're going to start their jobs
yeah.
at $1.05 for every
Yeah!
job
Woohoo!
that a man earns. But do you have any advice for these young women who are starting their careers, who may face forms of harassment more subtle than the kind that you faced? I mean, is it wise to speak up? When do you speak up? How do you speak up?
Well, I think now it's wise to speak up. I think we could have had that debate a few years ago about whether it was wise. And, you know, I mean, all of us had to go through an education process, even women. You know, we didn't know what was the line, where the line should be drawn as managers or as women sometimes. But now I think we've gotten specific, and I think I would highly recommend that any young woman in business do report. There's no way that we're going to get past this unless women are, again, that kind of corporate bravery, brave enough to report. And, you know, the men who are still making these terrible mistakes, the thing that seems to be common about them is that they don't get caught, nobody says anything, and they do it over and over and over again. So if you're not willing to stand up for yourself, you should report so that it doesn't happen to someone else. You know, because when you're in the middle of it, you can think that, oh, it's only me. He's never said that to someone else. But now we know. You know, now we know that you know, these guys that have been cited in the public media have, you know, whether it's Bill Cosby or whether it's, you know, the Fox News guys or whoever, that they're doing the same things over and over and over again. It's victim, you know, it's victim after victim. So now we know we have to report.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about the evolution of Executive Women for Hillary, which is now Executive Women for Her, and the vision, the strategy, what you hope to grow in that endeavor?
Well, Executive Women for Hillary was a lot more exciting than Executive Women for Her. Can I just confess that?
It was as an observer, too, I have to say. So,
yes. It was a lot more fun.
It was an exciting time back then. So.
It was an amazing thing. And, you know, I mean, we gathered together 2,400 women across the country, you know, all looped in on by technology, and we taught executive women how to roll up their sleeves and get dirty on the campaign trail, how to knock on doors, how to make phone calls, how to, you know, create your own way of doing. We had women who wrote letters and put letters in under every door in their buildings in Manhattan. You know, it wasn't really legal, but it was fun. And we, you know, we went everywhere. I mean, we went where we decided to follow the instructions of Minnie Timuraju, who was the head of Women for Hillary in the Brooklyn headquarters. And so we'd say, where do you want us to go? And she'd send us into the primaries. And, you know, so she'd say, okay, go to Iowa. And it was 0 degrees in Iowa. And then she'd say, go to Minneapolis. It was 12 degrees in Minneapolis. And we'd say, could we go to Texas? And she'd say, no, go to New Hampshire. And there we'd be, and it would be 12 degrees in New Hampshire. You know, we all got new winter wear, and it was kind of fun. But, you know, so we spent our own money, and we traveled, and we knocked on doors, and we did everything. And it was all for one purpose: to elect the first woman president. And the fact that we elected the first woman abuser-in-chief instead is just, you know, appalling. So we tried to recover. It took us a very long time, and then we reformulated as Executive Women for Her. And, you know, what we're being very judicious about how much we do right now, because we know there's a big onslaught coming during the elections. We've done some work on the special elections, but mostly we're in a kind of a holding pattern, keeping each other together, waiting for the primaries to be over, because we want to support candidates after the primaries. We don't want to get involved in the primaries because it's a very different, you know, it's so local at that point and so involved. And so we are planning to work on the midterms and to do the same thing, to go and do And the only difference is that instead of having one candidate, we have about 600 candidates because, you know, all the House is running, 1/3 of the Senate is running, all the governors, and now we're being told by Eric Holder and his wonderful organization that, you know, he's going to be focusing his organization on secretaries of state and, you know, all kinds of statewide jobs. So our message to our members is to get out and do. Nothing is more important than bringing the House back to blue and bringing the Senate back to blue if we can, and to winning as many governorships as Democrats as we can. We have to defeat the literally insane Republican agenda that's floating around now, or women will be just screwed for the next 50 years. So, you know, we're encouraging everybody to do everything that they can, and we're hoping to be able to organize as much as we can, and we're going to be very specific, choosing specific candidates for us to go after. But we just encourage everybody to do something very significant and spend a serious amount of time in September and October on any candidates of your choice.
Are you optimistic?
I am optimistic, yeah. I'm very optimistic. I think we can take back the House, and that can be a stop everything win, you know.
Great. I hope you're right.
I hope so too.
You've been right many times before.
Yes,
so.
I have a pretty good
track record.
Pretty good track record of reading the future.
Okay, so one last question, and then I'll open it up to the audience. But you mentioned in your self-introduction that you were an English major, an English literature major, and you went on to do all kinds of amazing things, right? So advertising executive, CEO, speaker, author, public advocate, so much more. So what advice do you have for the students in the room trying to think about how they can translate their liberal arts college choices? Because they're 18, they come in, they decide what they want to study, or sometimes their parents decide what they should study, right? We in our curriculum are trying to teach critical thinking skills. That's what we're trying to teach. And so how do they transform this experience into a meaningful work-life experience? How do they do that? How did you do that?
Well, first of all, I had a really extreme kind of liberal arts degree because I studied from the time I was a sophomore till I graduated. I studied English literature chronologically from Beowulf to Beckett, chronologically going forward, every period, every kind, you know, all the writers and
that was just the bees.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was just the bees. I guess I created that bookend because I thought it sounded good. Beowulf to Beckett. You know, I studied it. I wrote my own program of how I wanted to get my degree, and they accepted it. It was based on an Oberlin model, and I created this Beowulf to Beckett and did my honors thesis on Beckett. And then I had a side thing going on with Russian literature because I had read an enormous amount of Russian literature, so I had a lot of credits for Russian literature as well. But so I didn't take a single science course, a single math course, a single anything course, no politics, no nothing, just read and wrote about English literature. So it's kind of an unusual degree. And then I had to translate that into work. You know? So if you think you have troubles trying to make your liberal arts degrees useful, imagine mine. But you know, so I started out trying to find that job as an editor. And then I ended up in sales right away, immediately, and flourished in sales. But the reason why I flourished in sales was because I had such good skills that I had learned with my English degree. So I was a great writer. You know, I wanted to write. I was a really good writer. I found that writing a business letter could be, you know, you could write a 2 or 3 page business letter and blow someone away with your writing skills. And I learned that I could use my imagination, which I was attracted to English literature because of the imagination embedded in it and what it, you know, how it pulled in your heart and your mind together. And I found that I could do that in business. I could create something, even when I was at the first time in ad sales, that I could make ad sales, you know, really somehow, you know, imaginative and attractive and well-written and well-spoken, and I just had an edge over guys who golfed. Yeah. And I had a real edge in getting a job and in keeping a job, and I had an edge in getting ahead in the company because I could give a speech and I could, and I could think. And in magazines, it was partly just making this magazine, which was helping women anyway, even if it was just helping them cooking and cleaning in the early days, it was still about women. And I could make that topic sing. And then I found out I could write presentations, and I could give presentations, and people wanted to hear me, and I was funny when I presented, and I had our marketing department draw cartoons of working mothers, and nobody had seen anything quite like it. And so, my advice is to, it's really important to find a way to make a living, but the skills that you learn, whether you're studying history or whether you're studying English or whatever you're studying, the skills that you learn can be translated into business if you want to go that direction, and if not, then you can become the editor that I wanted to be.
Okay, so you have 3 kids, right?
I have 2 kids.
2 kids. Top, how you had to, for camps, list the attributes that your kids had? Like, in 3 words, the top. So what are the top 3 attributes we want our students to have going into the workforce?
Courage. I mentioned that before, courage. I would say persistence. I think persistence just really pushed me ahead all the time. That what happens when you lose 30% of your business, you just persist. How do you get that job? You get a no, and I got a no I worked for Ms. Magazine, I got a no the first time, and then they went back and read my letter and apologized, hired me the next time I was open for a job, Like, we're sorry we didn't hire you. Could we hire you now? Sure. But so persistence, and then, I would say the last thing is to have I don't know if this is an attribute, but to be a learning being, because, you really, when you start in your career, you don't know anything. You know what you learned in school, but you don't know anything about that field or that area or anything, really. And so you have to learn really quickly, and then if you stop learning, then you stop being a good business person or being a good editor or whatever. So you have to, we all learned that lesson with the internet. There we were being magazine people, everything printing on paper, and then all of a sudden the internet came, and my investors, when I bought Working Mother with them, they gave me a BlackBerry so that they could always reach me, and then of course they never ever called because they were too busy buying companies, so I had to always call them. But my BlackBerry, was my introduction to technology, and I wrote the first 2 chapters of my book on it, and I just became like a genius at this BlackBerry. I loved it so much. It was my baby. I called it my baby BlackBerry, and and I had to learn it though. I mean, I knew nothing about it. So lifelong learning at any age. And I think that one of the things that we do wrong with our employees is that we train young people and then we stop training older people. We should be training older people at least as much as we should be training young people, because the older people have the knowledge base to grow on. So lifelong learning.
I love your advice. Thank you. So I'm going to turn it over for questions from any of you.
Yes.
What of your business skills have you applied to your political activism?
To my political activism? Well, I mean, I think my top business skill is being persuasive, and that, because that ability to persuade, I've always had that. I've always been, I sold the most Campfire Girl candy when I was a little girl because I was persuasive and energetic. But so I think that, persuasion plays a huge role in business, because you have to persuade your customers to buy or do what you want them to do. You really have to persuade your employees. That's leadership. You have to persuade your employees that we're going to go in this direction. And you have to persuade your investors or whoever your stakeholders are that you're doing the right thing and that things are going to turn out okay, even though they look so grim right now. But so I think the same thing in politics. I think really worked at persuading a group of people with this basic tenet, which was that as executive women, executive women for Hillary, executive women for her, as executive women, we sit in our offices and we have assistants and we have all these, reports and stuff, and we're so important and we're so busy. And I think the biggest thing I had to do was to persuade our membership that we had to really, really do the hard work. We had to do what every other person had to do, which was to persuade other people to vote for Hillary. And to do that and make a difference, we had to go do what the campaign told us to do. We had to go door to door. We had to show up for all kinds of things. We had to fundraise. We couldn't let any piece of the puzzle go untouched by our executive hands. And it's hard to get people to kind of climb out of their ivory tower or their cubicle, their big office, and do the real work, the postcard writing, whatever it is, the phone calling. It's hard. But that ability to persuade, I think, is what made Executive Women for Hillary very valuable to Hillary, and made Executive Women for Hillary very valuable to our members. They learned a lot. And each one of them now can, they don't really need us as much as they used to. They all know. In fact, I told a lot of the women after the election, I said, start an indivisible group in your area, because we couldn't really manage the whole 2,400 people the way we had with one purpose. And it's much harder for us now to even know what we should tell them to do. So I told a lot of them, start an indivisible group, join up with, the NDRC or whatever, any flippable, all these things, join them, do them. And, and that's, so I guess just, convincing people has always been my top business skill and was for that. But thanks for that great question. And Karen is a tremendous advocate, political advocate, and she gets her hands so dirty, all the way up to her armpits. She knows everything about every issue. So I appreciate that about you. Other questions? Janet, don't you want to ask a question? Good. Janet Wigfield is my conference director at Working Mother. Still there, doing a great job.
And this is a conversation we've had, but mentorship, we know how important that is, and I'm sorry I came in late.
That's okay.
I was with this one.
It's okay, I forgive both of you.
So talk about a couple of mentors that have been important to you, if you haven't already, but also reverse mentorship's really important. Who are some younger people that you've learned a lot from, and what have you learned?
Oh, well, okay, this is going to be really weird. You're not going to believe this, but I want to go back and talk about Jerry Greco again. He was the guy who I said, no, I love your wife, Pam, so I won't sleep with you. And he always was very gracious about that because he loved his wife, Pam, too. But he was actually a mentor to me. And he was probably the reason why I ended up in New York, because he was really a great salesman, and I used to watch him. Get him into he was my boss, so I'd take him on the big calls. I'd watch how he'd walk into a room, look around the office, instantly know how to get something on the wall that he would talk to the guy about, and they'd become buddies right away. And I'd see how he sat down and made himself completely equal to this really high-level person at Wolverine or whatever company it was. And I saw that, and I witnessed it, and it really taught me how to take control of a meeting and how to quickly become comfortable, make them comfortable, but stay in power and stay in control. But he told me, he said, Carol, those goons in New York, they're always really impressed with us out here in Chicago because they don't know what we do because they can't see us. So they think we're doing much more than we do. And he said the way to get, ahead is to take them on a business trip. And I was like the queen of business trips. I could make 20 calls in a day on a business trip. I mean, I had no end of energy. So I took my boss from New York on a business trip. And Jerry laid it out for me exactly how to do it, how to make it all work, and you want to get the highest level people. So you remember, what was the name of that company with the woman with the big hairdo, and she made all those pink Cadillacs. Mary Kay, thank you. So Mary Kay was in my territory in Texas. So I got an appointment with Richard, who is Mary Kay's son, who was running the business. And I have some great Mary Kay stories, but anyway. But so Richard running the business for Mary Kay, and I'd sold the business, been carrying it a little bit, and I brought my boss to see Richard, among a lot of other people. But anyway, so we walked into the meeting, and Richard sat us down, and I was so proud that I got this meeting. And he said to Frank, the ad director, he was like, so great to see you, and I love this kid, Carol, she's so fabulous, blah, 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 blah. And he goes, but we're not going to run next year. And completely blindsided, he had pulled his business from me. And, I probably from all the magazines, but I didn't know that at the time. Swear to God, we got out in the car, and I started crying my eyes out. I was so sure I was completely screwed because I just lost the piece of business that I came down to brag about. And I cried, and, but anyway, so Frank went back, and he was really upset that I cried, but he promoted me like 3 weeks later. So Jerry was absolutely right. Bring them on a big business trip. They don't know enough about you. They only see the good stuff, He thought I was really passionate, which I was, about the business. And when Working Mother started to do really well, because I sold the most pages in the magazine, he moved me out to run it. So, I forget what the question was, but yes. Okay, other mentees. Well, I learned from every young person, mostly my daughter. She buys my clothes for me, you know that old story. She taught me, I've learned more from my daughter than I can ever think that she could learn from me. And she's had some tough times in her life and some brilliant times in her life, and she keeps teaching me. She recovered from anorexia, and I watched that, how she did that, and that to me is like my great life lesson about overcoming adversity. Anorexia is the #1 killer for suicide of young women. And, I know my daughter was in danger, and she pulled herself out. And it was awesome to watch. So she's always on my top list of mentees. But, I just learned from, technology, you can't learn it from anyone but kids. My nephew Seth, he worked for me as a young man, and whenever I have a stupid technology question, he helps me out, or a smart technology question. But, I think it's a privilege to mentor, but it's always a dual role. You're always learning from your mentees. So, yes.
Lowly assistant editor back when you were at Working Mother.
Yes.
Very lowly, but I did have a woman boss, so I was shielded from the direct sexual harassment. But I think what may not have changed is the subtle patronizing of male bosses who either, take your ideas and that kind of continues. And I deal with editors now where I have to retrieve it and say, no, that was my thing. And I just wondered if you could speak a little bit about when you get past the clearly illegal, abusive harassment piece, but where it still may exist that there's that subtle theft of either your ideas, or I think young women are much better about taking credit and speaking up, but maybe sometimes they could use another push. So if you could address that, please.
Yeah, no, I think, taking credit is a really tough issue because I think everybody kind of does it. Men do it more than women, I think, because they're just so proud of themselves all the time. They just think they're so cool and so good, and if they hear a good idea, they hear it in their own head, And in a way, I think it's part of their hubris and part of their, their energy in life is that they take things and synthesize them and spit them back out. And, women are more thoughtful and more careful and more kind. And honestly, I think that women just really have a better ability to empathize with someone having their idea stolen, and so they might not do it as much. But I think I've stolen a lot of people's ideas. You know, Janet could probably testify to a million ideas. Yeah, I mean, we used to argue all the time over whose idea the name of a conference was. Didn't I come up with that idea, Janet? Yeah, oh yeah. Executive Women for Her was Janet's idea, but I gave you full credit for that one. Remember? Did you have to remind me that you did it the first? Oh, okay, but except for right now. But I have stolen many ideas from Janet. Seriously, I know I have. Seriously, and you know, and partly it's if you believe in something, then you kind of do grab ownership of it. And so that idea can start from anywhere. I think we have to worry less about where our ideas come from and grab not the idea, but the right to execute that idea. What you want to do in business is if a guy says that an idea is great, you want to say, you know, I would love to be the one to make that idea happen. I'm uniquely qualified to grab that idea and run with it. Because in the end, whoever came up with the idea, you know, there's not that much care about ownership unless you're in the IP area, but, you know, but there's a lot of care about who brings home the bacon, who brings in the revenue, who makes the conference great. You know, so you want to be on the acting side of those ideas. Let the idea part maybe kind of like just, you know, float around. And by the way, ideas are very fungible. We all, I mean, literally, Janet and I would stand at a blackboard and write down, you know, words and words and words to come up with a name for a conference. And whose idea was it in the end? You know, it's really like also in the air. Once an idea starts floating around in a company, it's in the air. And everybody kind of starts to suck on it and get excited about it and feel like, oh, that's my lollipop, you know. No, it's everybody's, you know. But what you want to do is grab the right to execute. That's what matters, not who the genius is who thought it up. But it's a really good question, and it's a very subtle problem that women face. You know, women have to just be so much bolder. Yes?
So we didn't specifically touch on this. A lot of countries have now imposed quotas for women on boards. What are your thoughts around that? Do you think that would be effective?
I think it's a great idea. I'm so ashamed of our country, and I have been for so many years, that the shame is just part of my clothing. I wear it everywhere I go. I mean, to be the greatest country in the world and to not have paid maternity leave, be one of only, now it's only 3 countries. One of those 4 countries, I think it was Liberia, Ellen Sarwith got paid leave through, you know? I mean, it's appalling that we don't have that. And we're not leading as a country in anything about supporting women. The only thing we're leading in is that we have great women, and the women in this country got themselves college educations. The reason why the 80s saw the wage gap decrease by more than any other decade was because women in the 80s went to college like mad, you know, and it was a huge sea change. Now we're more than 50% of the graduates of college, but we don't have, so we've gotten ourselves educated, and that's why we're doing better in business. But we have no support. We have no paid maternity leave. We have no child care subsidies or help from anybody except companies. We know we have an appalling state of legislation supporting women, and it's now going backwards because of Donald Trump and his merry band of weirdos who want to see women back in the kitchen. But, so yes, I think I'll take anything like that. Give me quotas for boards. We're so far from being equitable in so many areas. I will take quotas for anything.
Yeah, I'm just going to chime in for a second. Less than 4% of women are in corporate boards are women. Public companies, and it's just appalling, and there's virtually no trend over 30 years. In fact, it was a little bit higher 30 years ago just because of the arbitrariness of some of the data and the collection of companies. And, you know, any step, I agree with Carol, any step at all will make a significant difference, and it's time to stand up, and it's time to demand representation. It's absolutely absurd that there are so few women on corporate boards. It's just beyond belief. It's appalling.
Yeah, go ahead. I can hear you.
Your question about, your idea not being heard, I've been there a million times, and the only female in a room of men who condescend, put you down, minimize whatever it is. And I'm thinking, you're in boardrooms, you're in situations where you're probably the only female, and you have someone doing that. You have a great sense of humor. I'm thinking you probably use that. What suggestions do you have for people like us who find ourselves in that situation without being brittle? How do we fight that condescension, that minimizing of us?
Okay,
Sometimes nastiness
okay.
that happens.
I think, first of all, so Working Mother was a hugely female company, as you know, the 3 stalls, all that, the 3-stall rule. And then I sold the magazine, because then the big recession hit. And I was very lucky to be able to sell in 2008. And if I hadn't been able to sell, I don't think Working Mother would be here today and all the great work that they're doing. And so, so I sold on September 26th, 2008, which means like 2 weeks later would have been too late because Lehman Brothers folded that week that I sold. So, so it was a real squeaker getting that through. And I sold to a company that owned all male magazines, Field and Stream and all these male magazines. And then they had one women's magazine, and they bought us to be a companion magazine for that one. Not because they thought we'd be lonely, but they were hoping to be able to tie them together and sell advertising that way, But so it was an extremely male-oriented culture, excessively almost. And I had, and it was based in Florida, and I was in New York. In Florida, they were all Republicans and very, it was a difficult situation. So I have been the only woman in many, many, many meetings, but the biggest trial by fire was being in this big male company as the CEO of a company that they acquired. I think there's a couple things that you need to do, and one has to do with women standing for each other. The best thing to do is to have the women, pre-plan and have a long-standing understanding between themselves of how they'll support each other in meetings. This happens in boardrooms where women are 2 or 3 members in a whole board, and they will plan and get together and say, how can we support each other? And so if you can have 2 or 3 women in the meeting, it's been proven that one woman alone is just, really not even considered to be in the room. 2 women, suddenly they're a small force, and 3 women, it's not an oddity anymore, and you get a little bit of normalcy. So you want to try to make sure that you have enough women in the room, if at all possible, by inviting, could I bring Sally from marketing or whatever, into this meeting? And then you want to make sure that the women are aware that, that there's situations in this company or this group or this organization where women get minimized. And that what we want to do is to echo each other, and to call and say, what do you think about that, Jane? And really throw the ball to the woman. Grab the ball and throw it to a woman. And to support them. Jane says, let's go for X. You don't want to, minimize her yourself. You want to support that and say, and we could even go for Y. Building on what Jane said, I think we could also do this. And you create a relay race kind of situation. Well, we didn't have to do that very much at Working Mother because we were always all women, and so we could beat each other up like crazy and have fun doing it because we didn't have those kind of that minimization going on. But it's a real big problem, and what I did for my guys in Florida was, I really just stuck up for my guns, and I tried to speak up in meetings, but I had a real shock happen to me, which was that we had a woman come over from Europe who ran a series of meetings for us with all the corporate people. And, it was like training, some kind of, guru training or whatever. And she and I got to be friends, and she came to all my conferences, and she, I used to ask her for advice on, because she was Scandinavian, so it was really great because she could give me all the Scandinavian stuff of how they were progressing with women. Anyway, but at one point she said to me, Carol, you're so dynamic in these conferences and these meetings, but in the corporate meetings, you don't really say as much as I thought you would. And I was shocked. I was like, really? Me? I'm so brave. I'm so corporately brave. And, I realized that I had started out that way and I'd gotten really beat down. I mean, I had some really hard experiences of being beat down and, I don't know. And so I had to rev it back up. But so another thing you can do is try to witness for each other and say, I think, men oftentimes come out of a meeting and sit and talk 2-on-2 and say, hey, you really blew that, you idiot. That was the wrong thing to say. Don't you know Jim is really sensitive about his 2 martini lunches or whatever, and he wants them to be 3 martini lunches, and so women can do that, but we're very careful with each other. So we have to train ourselves to say, hey, that was great you did in the meeting, or even that was not great. And Janet, I think I've had a long history of telling people straight talk in our company, and if they were over the edge or not up to the edge, or I try to tell them straight, because if I won't, who will? And you can feel that way and think that way as women. If I won't tell her that she's being mousy, or if I won't tell her that she's talking way too much, or if I won't tell her whatever. And the thing is that you say it not as a criticism. You say, I just want to give you some feedback. And feedback can be painful. You say that before you tell them. I just want to give you some feedback. Here's what I saw. It's only about behavior. Here's what I saw. Here's what I saw in your behavior. It's not about you. You're shrill. No, you don't say that. You say, I saw that they're reacting this way. This is what I saw, that you talked a lot. I saw that. Whatever it is. Or you didn't talk at all. Why didn't you talk? You have such great ideas. So, practical things, that using tricks and bolstering yourself, making fun of men kind of helps, a little bit, but you got to be careful.
Hi, Carol.
Hi, Sarah.
Am I on? Okay, I'm sick today, so I have a sultry voice.
I love your nasty woman T-shirt.
Yeah, of course.
This is Sarah Batcher. She's a graduate of Barnard.
Someone who was lucky enough to teach Carol about technology a few years ago. So we talked a lot about how the majority of women have trouble stepping up, leaning in, whatever verb you want to use. But we're in a very special place. We're at Barnard. And to Provost Bell's point about how many women are being told while they're at Barnard, we have 600 new women every year who are being told they're going to go out in the workforce, they're going to negotiate that first salary, they're going to land that amazing job, and they're going to be making more than their male counterparts. There's a bit of a learning curve when you leave Barnard. And what advice do you have for the probably, we'll say, majority or a huge amount of women that come out of a place like this who are, I don't want to say overconfident, but don't meet those goals that we've been set up to achieve? How do you recover from that overconfidence and any failure that it might kind of bring about in your early years of your career, and not lose sight of what you need to be successful?
Well, you're talking about career disappointment. Yeah, it's a very difficult thing to face, and I mean, it happens to everybody in their career. Nobody's career is straight line, not even men. Everybody has setbacks and everybody has disappointments, and one of the things that I think that coming out of an all-women's college now, one of the things to do is to think about men as being your ally. I mean, I make a lot of jokes, and I love to make fun of men, but they really are our allies, and Jerry Greco really did help me to get my career launched, and so I think that coming out of an all-women's college, you want to really make sure that you pay attention to the men in your organization and try to find ones that can be your allies, and who's just naturally your ally, and who can you team up with, who's a man, because the men still have, they still have an advantage over us, so we want to make sure we don't, just ignore them. But in terms of disappointment, now, the first thing I want every young person to think of is that when you hear people on stage, they've been working at their career. I am 40 years into my career, 40 years. I mean, it's unbelievable to me. You know, I'm like, what? How did that happen? But so in those 40 years, I'm just telling you a few of the things, and it all sounds so great. And when I say I've had failures, you know, I talk about the 9/11, but that wasn't my failure. It was a failure that happened to everybody. But I had my own personal failures where I got fired, I got demoted, I got told things were not right. You know, I mean, all throughout the whole career, I've had difficult times. And I must say the first 4 years, I had 4 jobs in 4 years. And I was kind of like going from one to the other, trying to learn and catch up and even learn the lingo of ad sales and all that. I remember I didn't have a proper raincoat, and I went on a job interview and I couldn't take my raincoat off because I had put a sweater underneath it because it was too light. And so it was stuck to my sweater. And I was just trying desperately to get this raincoat off and keep the sweater on without looking like a complete moron in front of the guy who ended up hiring me, you know. I mean, so it's just everything is a learning curve. But I think that, you know, you have to give yourself a lot of breaks and a lot of leeway in your first, you know, 10 years. You have to think of it the long game and say, you know, 10 years from now, I'll look back and I'll tell this as a funny story that my sweater got stuck to my coat and I couldn't get either of them off, you know. I mean, you have to look back and say, I got fired from this job, and it took me 5 months to find my next job, but, you know, that's okay because 10 years from now, you know, I'll be doing the hiring. I mean, you know, you have to realize that everyone's struggling and everyone's putting on a great face, and especially the women who stand up on stages. I was on a panel at Hershey company, and I was the only entrepreneur, and she asked us to tell our mistakes, and not one of the corporate women would tell a single mistake that they made because their audience was filled with their bosses. And so I had to tell all the mistakes for the whole panel. Well, I made this mistake, and then I made that mistake. You know, it was horrible. But you know, but so all those corporate women were all jockeying to not look like we're making mistakes, or that we've been, you know, looked upon poorly, or that we've been fired, or that we've been whatever, you know. So, or that we didn't get the job that we were perfect for or wanted, you know. So. Business is heartache. Working in the nonprofit, you know, careers are part, you know, brilliant, part heartache, part just deep depression, and then they have their wonderful high moments, you know. And in between is all the work that has to get done, and you're, you know, doing the work. So I would just say focus on, you know, for people who experience career disappointment, try to find what's the right you know. Try to find like notice when you're happy in your job, notice something that you like to do, and go for that, you know. I mean, I like meetings, I like leading, I like leadership, so I went for that. And I went to work for an entrepreneur because I wanted to be in charge. And you know, I started the Girls Club when I was 9 years old, and then when they elected someone else president, I folded it. Because I knew that no one would keep it going but me. So if you don't want me as president, okay, we won't have it. You know? You know, so I knew I had to be in a leadership position or it would be kind of psychotic. But so you want to find am I good in support? Am I good in detail? Am I good in vision? Am I good in, you know, in taking notes at this point? You know, whatever it is, do what you enjoy and what you're good at, and follow that path, and something will pop up that'll be the right thing. And then you get to be deeper and deeper. Yes, my favorite.
One of the things.
Marie, talk in the microphone.
I'm Marie Wilson. I know this woman. I do know her.
And I know you.
And have
and I
known
love
her.
you.
I'm more in love today than ever. Hearing
Yay.
you. No, I want to point out that you are one of the most resilient people I have ever met in my history of work and life. And I think a part of what you have talked about today are the ways that, resilience are the ways people keep themselves strong and hardy and a way to be able to go. And you actually spread that resilience to other people, and they get hopeful. We lost the election, but we were very hopeful and good.
Yes.
But I think that's so important in work. I mean, I've worked at a lot of different things, but just the ability to get up in the morning and say, yeah, I'll figure that out. Yeah. And she, just rub up against her before she leaves, because she has got it in spades, and it's a wonderful thing, and it helps your people all around you. Anybody who knows you is like, you're never going to be like, there's always got to be a way to actually take the next step, and that's all we need most of the time. So I'm so appreciative of your being here and telling these young
So I think
women.
that's a wonderful way to end the session.
I
Thank
would
you
love to
for
end that with
doing
that.
that. And thank you, Carol. It was really a pleasure and an honor to talk to you tonight. We've learned a lot. Courage, persistence, lifelong learning, and just resilience and a smackling of humor. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Linda. It was wonderful to be here with you.